Welcome to Adventist News and Views, your video source for the latest information and insights shaping the Adventist conversation, brought to you by Spectrum. Here are the highlights of this week. A U.S.-based Adventist nonprofit faces backlash from villagers in Brazil after promises of schools and clinics allegedly gave way to private homes and restricted resources. Thousands of Baltimore residents receive unsolicited copies of The Great Controversy, sparking everything from curiosity to critique over mass religious mailings. We speak with a Malawi-based Adventist hero who has rescued over 5,000 victims of human trafficking through faith-driven activism and advocacy. Political organizer Charlie Kirk, recently embraced by some Adventists, is tragically shot and killed during a campus event in Utah. A new novel about corporate life explores how to witness your faith at work without getting fired. Plus, Spectrum Journal Spotlight and our video of the week featuring a sermon from Raewyn Orlick, Associate Pastor for Discipleship and Nurture at the La Sierra University Church in Southern California. A U.S.-based Adventist-affiliated nonprofit, Global Thinkers Now, founded by Robert and Beatrice Ritzenthaler and linked to Village Seventh-day Adventist Church in Berrien Springs, Michigan, is facing serious accusations of exploitation in the Amazon village of Santo Antonio, Brazil. Initially welcomed by the largely Adventist Ribeirinho community for their promises of medical and educational aid, GTN gained land and local trust. But tensions rose as two large homes were constructed, one of them now serving as the couple's private residence, while promised schools, clinics, and community resources failed to materialize. Villagers claim GTN restricted access to solar electricity and internet, used unauthorized images of locals for U.S. fundraising, and failed to provide meaningful support. Legal battles have ensued over land use and ethics, and recent investigative reporting by Spectrum, including on-the-ground interviews, has revealed deep divisions, allegations of deception, and a growing backlash, both in Brazil and within the broader Adventist community. Thousands of Baltimore residents recently received unsolicited copies of The Great Controversy, a 19th-century Adventist apocalyptic book by Ellen G. White, as part of a nationwide campaign by Remnant Publications, an independent Adventist-affiliated publisher based in Michigan. While some locals dismissed or discarded the book, stacking it in lobbies or bringing it to themed happy hours at places like the Club Car Drag Bar, others expressed curiosity. The campaign sparked online buzz and raised questions about religious outreach methods, environmental impact, and financial priorities. In an in-depth interview with Spectrum, Seventh-day Adventist anti-trafficking advocate Maxwell Mataware shared his decades-long fight against human trafficking in Malawi and beyond. Since 1998, Mataware has rescued over 5,000 victims, including women, children, and exploited migrant workers, and helped pass Malawi's landmark 2015 Trafficking in Persons Act. He founded the Malawi Network Against Trafficking and the child rights NGO Eye of the Child, which offers rescue services, legal support, and public awareness campaigns. A member of the Lilongwe Central SDA Church and host of an anti-trafficking program on Hope Channel Malawi, Mataware credits his Adventist faith and family, especially his wife, for sustaining his work. Charlie Kirk, a 31-year-old political organizer and founder of Turning Point USA, was shot and killed during a public Q&A event on September 10 at Utah Valley University. Known for his controversial rhetoric, Kirk had recently drawn attention from some in the Adventist community after praising Sabbath values. He was a featured speaker at a Wisdom Pearl event earlier this year, alongside prominent Adventists like Ben Carson and Danny Shelton, though he never claimed to be a Sabbath keeper himself. The shooting, while he was answering a question about gun violence, has prompted bipartisan mourning and sparked renewed debate about political extremism. Scott Moncrief reviews On the Brink, a novel by Michael E. Cafferkey that explores Christian witnessing in the workplace. The story follows Gabriel Oliver, a healthcare manager who rethinks his purpose after a health scare. Initially, his bold religious expressions at work backfire, leading to a demotion. But through trial and error, he learns to live out Christian values, like caring for the vulnerable, using business language instead of religious terms. Moncrief finds the book most compelling in its nuanced take on corporate life and the evolving strategies of faith sharing. Be sure to check out these and other stories that are shaping the Adventist conversation on our website at spectrummagazine.org. Spectrum Journal Spotlight. Check out our latest journal pieces featuring in-depth analysis and thoughtful reflections on faith, theology, and contemporary issues. And finally, our video of the week features a sermon by Raewyn Orlick, Associate Pastor for Discipleship and Nurture at the La Sierra University Church in Southern California.
You may be seated. It's been very hard to watch the news this week. Children in Gaza facing famine and having to stand for hours in lines to try to get water for their families. Like Rafif said, I wake up in the morning and have to search for water and things to burn to cook food. I used to wake up and go to school. I was very happy then. This week, the Washington Post put out an article with the names of all the children that have died in Gaza. 31% of people who have died in Gaza in this war have been children. Kenan Nassar, 9 years old, loved math and soccer, had a kind heart, and was killed in an airstrike while playing in a refugee camp. Tala, killed at 10 years old, loved parties, but had become very afraid of the war, the sounds of bombing, the presence of death. It's hard to watch the news and read the stories, and I was just scrolling through the Washington Post of all these names after names after names after names. And then in Ukraine, another Russian strike with children among the casualties. And then yet another heartbreaking act in our own Minneapolis, turning a sacred space of prayer into a valley of darkness. This cartoon from the Washington Post summed it up for me. God help us. We're making our way in these few weeks slowly through Psalms 23 and looking for what does this ancient song, this most beloved, extremely familiar song, have to say to us today. Last week, Pastor Icky went through the first 3 verses, and I had no idea. I really enjoyed this little tidbit that he included, that about 700 years before David ruled in Israel, Hammurabi, the 6th king of Babylon, had written, I made the people lie down in safe pastures. I did not allow anyone to frighten them. And Pastor Icky, I love that comparison of earthly rulers saying, I'm the one who makes the people lie down in the good pastures. I'm the good shepherd, versus David saying, the Lord Yahweh is my shepherd. Yahweh is the one that I'm looking to for leadership, the one who rules above all rulers, who leads us into green pastures, still waters, restoration, and right paths. But in verse 4, the one that I will be dwelling in today, in verse 4, the tone shifts. Now David brings us into a very dark valley. The Hebrew literally says the valley of death's shadow, or the shadow of death. Wadi Kelt is one of those dark valleys. This is a pretty incredible picture. It's hard to even see where the bottom of this valley is in Wadi Kelt. We're not sure exactly what a valley of the shadow of death David is thinking of as he thinks of his shepherding days and leading his sheep from the highlands to the lowlands and back in a cycle each year. But perhaps it could have been Wadi Kelt. It's the road that goes from Jerusalem to Jericho. You may remember it from the story Jesus told about the Good Samaritan. Shepherds often choose these valleys or gullies as they're taking the sheep to the summer highlands for grazing because, guess what? What runs through the valley? The water. The water, these deep gorges, these deep canyons or valleys, that's where the water is, and that's where the vegetation grows. And so that's where the sheep can find grazing in those long journeys But these valleys are narrow, and they can be dark even during the daytime, because when you're down deep in a gorge, the sun cannot get there quite as easily. It can also be dangerous. You can be susceptible to flash flooding and predators, because you can't see very well around you when you're in a narrow path, a narrow valley. This death shadow language, this strange poetic word, death's shadow, is used in other places in the Bible, mostly in the book of Job, describing suffering. So this word, the valley of the shadow of death, death shadow, is used all of these different times in Scripture. And look, Job just outdoes them all in using this word. Job is focused on that dark, death's shadow valley. But we also see it used quite often in the Psalms, and then the prophets also use this word. And it was the word of the prophet that really caught my eye. Isaiah 9, verse 2 says, "The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwell in the land of the shadow of death, upon them a light has shone." In case you don't recognize that verse from the prophet Isaiah, Matthew quotes it in his gospel to talk about Jesus' ministry. He says, "The people who sat in darkness have seen a great light. And for those who sat in the region and the shadow of death, light has dawned." Matthew 4 and verse 16. Back to the prophet Isaiah, Matthew draws on this verse because later Isaiah goes on to say, well, what is the light that has dawned? If you read from Isaiah again, verse 6 of chapter 9, Isaiah goes on to say, "For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulder, and his name will be called Wonderful, Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace." I can't hear those words without hearing Handel's Messiah going through my head. He's the one that made these verses stand out to me and know these verses. And Matthew is saying, look, Jesus is the one that Isaiah said was coming into Death Valley, into that dark place of the valley of the shadow of death. In our verse today, Psalms 23, verse 4, David says, "I will fear no evil." Why? Because you are with me. Notice, David does not say, "I will face no evil." The evil is real. The evil is undeniable. He does not say, "I will not have to face any evil following Jesus as his sheep. I will not have to face any evil." No, he says, "I will not fear the evil that I will face. I will fear no evil." Why? Because you are with me. So our kids are 3, 5, and 7, and I've discovered that this is the prime age for being afraid of the dark. I didn't need Google to tell me that this is the prime age. And Desmond just started saying, the youngest one, that he's scared at night. If I leave the room to go do something else before he's fully in bed, that he's scared. And Eleanor said it was okay to share. She heard about some scary things, and sometimes she has a hard time going to different places of the house without a grown-up being there. But guess what? When I try to convince them that they're safe, I say, the house is safe, I promise you. The doors are locked, the gates are closed, even the lights are on, the house is safe. You can go there and you will be fine. Would I send you into a dangerous place? No, you can go there. But my powers of persuasion are terrible. Because as much as I try to reason my way to peace, it doesn't work. But guess what? When I go in person to whatever the scary place is, you would think I have superpowers. I am so powerful. When I come, as soon as I'm there, guess what? Fear is gone. No more fear. I want to hold on to that superpower a little bit longer. No more fear when I'm there. And this is what David is saying about God. My fear is gone. I will not fear evil because you are with me. Amazingly, this presence with fear even works with grown-ups. When we're alone and we hear a frightening noise or something of that nature, there's a portion of our brain called the amygdala, and it becomes very, very active. And it triggers our fight, flight, freeze response. So you get an increased heart rate, and you release your stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, and you have heightened awareness. And researchers, have done studies to see how all these effects take place when you're by yourself or you're with someone else. And they have found, using fMRI scans, that when participants hold hands with a loved one or even just sit with a supportive companion, the response of the amygdala is lessened. Even the touch of a stranger, even a stranger just being present in the room, ironically, especially if that stranger is a little bit different from you in some way, they found that tends to lower the stress. Somehow we think, oh, that person, they're a little bit different from me. Maybe they're not scared in this situation. So I'm okay, I'm feeling better. But there's something about presence that lowers our fear response physiologically, without any thought or effort. Of course, the effect is strongest with partners and parents. Psalms 23, verse 4, the language shifts, not only the tone in terms of darkness, but also the language shift from he to you. The Lord is my shepherd. He leads me versus I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Psalms 23, verse 4 shifts to that direct address straight to God. I will not be afraid. Why? Because you are with me. Jesus came into the darkest valley, as we saw from the book of Isaiah and the book of Matthew, that he came into Death Valley, into the darkest night, into that deep, dark pit. He came to be Emmanuel, as Matthew says, God with us, to hold our hands and walk us through the dark. At the end of Matthew's gospel, the very last words that Jesus says, Matthew 28 and the second part of verse 20, Jesus says, remember, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. Emmanuel, God with us, even to the end of the age, I am with you. This doesn't mean we won't face evil, but it means that we do not need to be afraid of evil. David goes on in this verse to talk about two tools that shepherds use. Every shepherd carries that he finds comforting or consoling in his valleys. The first one I'm going to mention is the staff, and it's familiar to us. You see this picture of all the sheep, and you see that little stick with that hook on it? That's the staff. That's the one we see usually in all the pictures, the shepherd's staff. This is what the shepherd uses to guide the sheep where they don't know where they're going, or to pull them out of thorn bushes when they've got all their wool stuck. I just cannot imagine how challenging that must be. The sheep is stuck, thorns everywhere. The shepherd takes that staff and pulls the sheep out of that bad situation. The shepherd used the staff to pick up a young lamb to give back to its mother, so the smell of the shepherd won't be on the lamb, but the mother will smell the lamb as it is. This is one that's familiar, that staff. But there's another tool that's really unfamiliar to me until I did a little bit more reading this week. The rod. The rod. This is not the one that we see in the pictures. I've never seen Jesus the shepherd with a rod like that. Have you? Someone can find me a picture to see Jesus with this rod. So he's always carrying the staff, but this rod is a little bit unfamiliar. It was the shepherd's weapon. The rod is the club that the shepherd could use in fighting off predators. The rod. The shepherd carried the staff and the rod, and that was comforting to David because he wanted to know that he would be protected. You want to know your shepherd will protect you. And yet, In the Gospels, when Jesus faces evil, he chooses not to use his rod. He told his disciple to put away his sword. Matthew 26, verse 53, Jesus says to Peter, "Do you not think that I could appeal to my Father and he will at once send me more than 12 legions of angels?" Jesus is saying to Peter, "Look, I have a rod. I don't need your sword. I have a rod, but I'm not using it." It wasn't for lack of power that Jesus spares the rod. It was from a deep sense of purpose. Jesus was called to show us a love greater than hate, a light stronger than darkness, a life more powerful than death. So he walks through it with us. And we're called to walk through it with others. This summer, on July 2nd, the LA Times had an article called "Faith Leaders Bear Witness as Migrants Make Their Case in Immigration Court." Pastors, priests, rabbis have been showing up in court to support people with information and the gift of presence. The Reverend Dr. Terry LePage informs a visitor in this picture. She's telling him that there's ICE agents there and their legal rights in Santa Ana Immigration Court in Santa Ana. And the Reverend Page says she has been attending immigration hearings nearly every day, going there to be present and show up with people. Dave Gibbons from New Song Church in Santa Ana in the article said, "We believe it's at the heart of the gospel. There's nothing more sacred than standing alongside those being marginalized." Father Scott Santa Rosa said, "We weren't planning to block or get in the way or do anything to disrupt. We just planned to be present and observe and say with our presence to migrants and refugees, 'Hey, you're not alone,' he said. 'No están solos,' you are not alone." "I will fear no evil, for you are with me." This week, Pastor Icky and I sat with a lady from Olive Crest, a not-for-profit foster agency with an office here in Riverside, dedicated to helping children and families in crisis. As I was thinking about this sermon, it can be so overwhelming to think about children in Gaza and Ukraine and Minneapolis and what can I possibly do? And certainly we should give money and we should use our voices for peace. But the amazing thing about Olive Crest, it helps connect people with children and families who need support right here and right now in the 92505. Some of the things they do is helping families become a host family where you could host some children whose parents need respite for a few days, that you can help give space for that family. It could mean helping foster families with a date night or transportation to appointments or purchasing clothes and diapers. There are so many different ways that we can show up and say, "You are not alone." This Monday, most of us will have a day off of work and school, and we're not sure what we're doing on Monday. I'm not sure if you all know what you're doing on Monday, perhaps a picnic or a barbecue or shopping for deals, heading to the beach. The beach probably will be pretty crowded, I'm guessing. Getting ahead on schoolwork, cleaning out your garage. What will you be doing on Labor Day? Let's pause for a moment this Labor Day to think about the people that helped make this holiday possible, people acting in solidarity, knowing that they are not alone. So imagine with me thinking back to the late 1800s, where you could be working 12 hours a day in a factory with dangerous machinery, 6 or 7 days a week, and guess what? You could be 6 or 10 years old. On September 5, 1882, 10,000 workers in New York City took the day off, unpaid, to march through the streets and demand better treatment. The idea spread, and 5 years later, Oregon became the first state to declare it an official holiday, a state holiday. And then in 1893, there was an economic depression, and George Pullman, who owned the Pullman Company, which made luxury railroad sleeping cars, he had built a company town near Chicago where workers lived in company-owned housing, shopped in company-owned stores, and were paid in company-issued credit. And it looked like a model town, but the problem was it gave the Pullman Company incredible control over the lives of its workers. Imagine, you work for one company, you have your house with that company, you have your food in your grocery store with that company, everything was that company. And when the Depression hit, the Pullman cut workers' wages by 25%. Imagine if your employer said, hey, I'm going to pay you 75% of what you were getting paid, but guess what? The Pullman Company did not do. They did not lower their rent of their houses that they were charging the employees, and they did not lower any of their prices at their stores. So you imagine these people are trying to make ends meet in the same way they did, and they were very frustrated with the company. So in May 1894, the railroad workers walked off the job, and it led to 125 workers across 27 states joining the strike, refusing to move trains that carried these Pullman luxury cars because of the treatment of the workers. So during that strike, President Cleveland at the time signed Labor Day into law. He signed it on June 28, and he was trying to calm everything down. You know, you have 125 people striking and all the trains not getting anywhere and people complaining about not getting their supplies. And so the president said, let's calm things down. Let's recognize this Labor Day that's spread everywhere, and let's celebrate the workers. And let's calm things down. But it did not work. Things did not calm down. And the railroad owners asked the federal government to intervene, and President Cleveland sent, guess what, federal troops to Chicago. And there's a picture, the federal troops in Chicago, against the wishes of the Illinois state governor, who thought they could handle it locally. And the federal government, in the process, they had cut off communication to these striking workers with the union leaders. They weren't allowed to talk to each other, and these leaders had been trying to urge, let's keep it calm, nonviolence, let's peaceful protests, all of that. And guess what? It was a tinderbox in Chicago. And violence erupted, and tons of railroad cars were destroyed by fire, and eventually the National Guard that was there, they shot into the crowd. 30 people died. The strike was over. Everything dispersed. And the railroads had lost millions of dollars. The strikers had lost millions of wages. The strike was crushed, and the workers returned to their jobs defeated, and nothing changed in that moment. And that's how we got Labor Day as a federal holiday. But certain things changed, yes? Things changed. Most of us have a 40-hour work week. We have child labor laws. There's rules about paying people more for overtime, right? There's workplace safety rules. There's paid time off in general. And guess what? If it wasn't for people like those strikers and people throughout time that have stood together instead of walking alone, we may still be facing those kind of working conditions today. We don't usually get to see the impact of how we walked through our darkest valleys. Those people that stood up and said, no, we're not going to work for 75% of what you were paying and then have to pay our rent and everything else. We're not going to see our children starving. Those people who stood up to say, they didn't get to see the impact and the result of the movement that they were part of. But the seeds were planted, and future generations, looking back, we can see the impact of how they walked together through their darkest valley and how we experience a better life because of their sacrifice. We may not get to see the impact of the valleys that we're walking through right now. If you're walking through a dark valley, you may not get to see the impact, but we believe in a God who sees, and a God who walks with us in those dark valleys. A God who, yes, holds a rod, reminding us that justice may be delayed, but it will not be denied. A God that holds a staff, reminding us that even when we can't see anyone with us or we can't see the direction that we're going, we are not alone. This is the God that we believe in. Emmanuel, the God who says, I am with you even to the end of the age, even when it seems like the whole world is falling apart, I'm with you. And if you're walking through the darkest valley today, facing evil today, may you not fear, but know that God is with you. And sometimes when we're scared, art can touch our heart in a way like nothing else. And so I close with a book. I offer you this children's book. It's called Found by Sally Lloyd-Jones. God is my shepherd, and I am his little lamb. He feeds me. He guides me. He looks after me. I have everything I need. Inside, my heart is very quiet as lying still in soft green grass in a meadow by a little stream. Even when I walk through the dark, scary, lonely places, I won't be afraid because my shepherd knows where I am. He is here with me. He keeps me safe. He rescues me. He makes me strong and brave. He is getting wonderful things ready for me, especially for me, everything I ever dreamed of. He fills my heart so full of happiness, I can't hold it all inside. Wherever I go, I know God's never stopping, never giving up, unbreaking, always and forever love will go too. Amen.
That's it for this week in Adventist News and Views. Subscribe for more stories that matter to the Adventist community, and let's keep the conversation going.